Hi, everyone. This is part 2 of my introduction to Project 1. And what I'm showing you here is an example that I made. It is a painting in layers in Illustrator of a one-point perspective photo that I took. So this is a photo. I'll move across the window here. This is a photo that I took looking up the street from my house. And it has one-point perspective because it is a photo of a pathway, the sidewalk, moving to one vanishing point. The lines of the sidewalk, of the shape of the sidewalk and the street move all to one vanishing point. So I'm going to show you how I drew that. I took the photo and I placed it on the bottom layer, which I'm going to show you at the end of this talk. And then I took the photo, I clicked on it and held Option. You can also do copy, and I moved it to the left because I'm going to be sampling the colors from that photo and saving them into my swatches palette. So you can see that I have my window set up. This is my document, and I have my palettes, color, swatches, stroke, and I have my layers at the bottom of that, layers and brushes. They're in tabs, and then I pulled these two palettes to the bottom and pushed them up to stick to the ones that were open at the top. So I've got 5 palettes open. These are the palettes that I like to have open most of the time, actually, in Illustrator. And others. And this is my palette dock. So all the palettes that I've used recently are waiting in the palette dock. But it's better to bring them out, to drag them out separately and put them into a floating palette group so that you can use them all the time. I talked about that in the introduction to Illustrator in Module 1. So these are my tools. I have them in a double arrangement, double column, so that I can use them easily on my laptop. But you can also put them in a single column by clicking on the 2 top arrows, if you prefer that, if you're working on a larger screen. Okay, so notice that I have quite a few layers here that I made. I asked you in the project sheet to create 5. But I actually have more layers here. You could also have the photo on the bottom layer and then pull a copy right next to it. So there are basically 2 side by side. But the reason that I put them into 2 layers is because if you want to turn off the bottom layer with the photo in it, this one turns off too, and maybe you don't want to turn both off at the same time. So I pulled the one that I had copied into another layer, which could be named layer 2, it doesn't really matter. And that's how I did that. I will turn off all the layers and show you how I constructed this. So I'm going to turn the first layer on, and you see that it is dimmed. I will be showing you that when I show you how to place a photo. Okay, so then I made a copy, and it's to the left where I can sample the color. Then I drew lines right on top in another layer. So I locked the bottom layers, and notice that the locks here are just to the right of the visibility eye in the layer. You cannot work on a layer when the visibility is turned off, and you cannot work on a layer when the lock is turned on. So you have to unlock a layer to work on it, and you have to turn it on and make it visible to work on it. So on my background, on the next layer, which would be layer 3, I drew the lines of the perspective. And then on the next layer, I drew shapes. And they were geometric shapes that I drew with the pen tool, click, 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 and filled with gradients. So in exercise 2, I showed you how to fill with gradients. Notice that there's also a light logic happening here, all the shapes are darker towards the foreground and lighter towards the background. So I assumed that my light source was towards the back. And if you look at the photo, you'll see that it actually gets lighter towards the top of the photo and darker. So you have to make up your mind how the light works in your photo for yourself, and then fill the shapes according to that light logic. Next layer was a background tree. So it was going to be overlapped by other objects, so I put it in the background. Midground trees. So I painted them and I called it midground, middle ground, and middle ground plants. And then background, foreground leaves. So the foreground layer is at the top, foreground leaves. And I did that with a scatter brush. So I actually had created the scatter brush, I think on the clipboard, and I deleted it somehow, but after I did the painting, but I had created it several times on the clipboard. So the clipboard in Illustrator, here it is a place that you can create things that you don't necessarily want to print, and they won't print. But if you want to make sure that they don't somehow interfere with the printing, you can delete them so that, you know, you may not run into problems later. But I think it's fine to leave things on the clipboard, because the print of your work will only happen to the edge of the artboard. So anything that you want to be printed will only be printed to the edge of your artboard, which you can see with a black line here. Okay, so now I'm going to quickly show you how to place a photo. So I'm going to close this and then make a new document in Illustrator. So we're going to say create new, and this would be how you start your project. So you're going to create a new document 10 by 16 inches as it says on your project sheet. So, and then you're going to go to the right and you can call it project 1 if you want, your project 1 and your name, just so that you identify it when you save it onto your desktop. And this is going to be portrait orientation because that's how I work. But most of you will want to work landscape orientation. No bleed, 1 artboard, CMYK color, medium raster effects so that your photo will be in your document, but it won't be at such a high resolution that it makes the file a little bit bigger. Say create, and it'll bring up your artboard. And now you're going to place the photo that you chose. So you'll have to navigate to it on your desktop, but say place, file, place, and go to the photo on your desktop. So it'll probably be a JPEG, and you can say place. And your cursor will come in loaded. You can double click, or you can hold shift to constrain proportions and pull it in. But I'm just going to double click. And notice that it's a little bit smaller than my artboard. So because I made the artboard this size so that if you want to print it, you can print it on 13 by 19 inch paper, and you could make a beautiful inkjet print of it on the 13 by 19 inch bright white Epson paper. I am going to hold shift to constrain proportions and either pull at any of the handles on the image, and I'm pulling it to the smaller dimension because that's what you're limited by. So notice that now when I use the zoom tool to zoom out a bit so you can see what I did, it still is bigger than this smaller, sorry, smaller than this artboard. So what you want to do now is go to the artboard tool, which is right above the hand tool, and close down the artboard so that it is exactly the size of the photo. You made the photo fit to the smaller dimension, and now you can close down the artboard around the photo. So now you have your first layer, which is layer 1, and it has the photo on it. Now I would put this point, make a new layer, and you can pull a copy of the photo. It'll probably come in, since you were pulling it, let's see what happens. I'm pulling a copy. Yeah, and I put it on the bottom layer. So let me show you now that you can move an object easily in Illustrator to another layer. See how the object is selected? I pulled a copy holding Option, or you could do Edit Copy. And on the PC, by the way, instead of holding Option, you would hold Alt to copy. And you see a little symbol appear when the object is selected on a layer that you want to move. So I just click on that object in the layer and push it to the layer, up to the layer I want it to be in. Now I go back to the image on layer 1, to the original image, to the artboard actually, that I'm going to be using to paint onto. And this time I'm going to manipulate this layer so that it is slightly dimmed. So I'm going to click on the layer, the word layer 1, double click, double click on away from the word and just double click on the layer itself, and you'll bring up the layer options. And I'm going to dim the image on that layer to 60%, let's say, so that I can use it as a self-made template, so that I can draw over it easily. And then I'm going to make new layers so that I have the layer that I can draw the lines on, so that I have the layer that I can start drawing the background shapes on, and the middle ground and the foreground. So you can either go to the bottom of the layers palette where there's a plus symbol and make new layers there. That's probably the easiest. Or you can go to the drop-down menu for layers and look at the options in that. New layer, duplicate layer, delete layer 1. So even options for layer 1, that's another way to get to the options palette. Yeah. Flatten all the layers, of course, is a command that we use when we want to print later. Yeah. So I'm going to, you could say new layer in this as well. I'm actually going to use the plus, the little button at the bottom of the layers palette next to the garbage can, and make new layers. I told you to make 5, but probably 6 would be fine. And then if you wanted to, you could start labeling them. Layer 2 was pushed to the top because the new layers are made on top of whatever layer you're on, and I guess I was on layer 1. So you can pull layer 2 right back down. You can change the order of your layers by pulling them. I'm also going to lock layer 1 because I don't want that photo. I don't want to be by mistake drawing on that layer. So the lines that I made with the pen tool, I would make on layer 3. Those would be the lines maybe that I would need for my perspective or to draw shapes over later. And then this layer, layer 4, might be my background. So I'm going to call it background. The next layer might be my middle ground. So I'm going to call it whoops. Double click on the word and it'll let you name it, mid-ground. And the last layer would be my foreground. So what I'm showing you here is that you are working from the inside out. That's what we call it. And inside out. So you're working from the back of the image, the background, the inside, to the front of the image, the foreground. And in between, there's the middle ground. So you're working bottom to top, the inside, the background to the foreground. So background, middle ground, foreground, bottom to top, and you're making new layers as you go. So the things in the foreground overlap the things in the middle ground, which overlap the things in the background. Okay, thank you.